We're going to chat about this in New York City with the author of The End of Protest and the co-creator of Occupy Wall Street, Micah White. Micah, 65 shootings reported on U.S. school campuses in 2017, 28 so far this year alone. This isn't a new problem, but why do you think this particular protest appears to be resonating more?
Well, I think that usually what happens is that protests take off when there's kind of like a willing historical moment. So I think that people are right now feeling something in the air. I think that across political spectrum, people are feeling a kind of intensity in the air. And this is like one of the first issues of this year to kind of grab people's attention. But I think it has to do with a larger kind of political backdrop in America right now.
Well, you look at what happened in Newtown. Once again, there was a protest, there was a movement. What makes this different, or is it any different?
I don't know. I mean, I think it's very hard because I think there's a kind of desire to be very positive and optimistic about the chance that this could be different. But I do think that I'm a little bit more cautious. I think that up until now, like what we're seeing is the kind of standard maneuvers that activists do, a large-scale march and these kind of behaviors. So I want to believe, but at the same time, I think there is a real danger that this could end like all of the other kind of protests that have emerged around school shootings over the last, decade or two.
What needs to happen to actually make it reach the next level? How do you give birth to a real protest movement that can enact change and last?
I mean, that's the golden question. I think that's what everyone's trying to figure out. I think that that one thing that you need to do is always engage with the real questions of power. I mean, what's good about the gun issue is that it is a constitutional question in America because we have the constitutional right to carry firearms. And so I think that what you need to do is orient the protest around actually engaging with, like, do we need to have a new constitutional assembly? Do we need to really challenge how decisions are made in this country? So I think that as long as it stays at the level of kind of progressive social issues, it will fail. But the moment that it tries to either become international by getting students in other countries also to rise up, or deeply engaging with the kind of constitutional and sovereignty questions, then I think it could possibly take off.
In your book, you write one of the reasons why Occupy failed was the inability of protesters to agree on one simple set of demands. The March for Our Lives, this latest one, has three: pass a law to ban assault weapons, stop the sale of high-capacity magazines, and close loopholes in background checks. Those are clear demands, but not necessarily simple ones. Do you think that could hurt this movement's goals?
I think there's a lot of debate about whether or not demands are essential to a movement's success. So we have examples of Occupy where we were unable to create a demand, but we also have examples of like the anti-war movement in 2003 that had a very clear demand, which was no to the war. So I don't think it's essentially around demands. I think that the essential thing is around how do you believe change will be enacted? And I think that right now the students are still acting as if they think they can put pressure on our elected representatives to do something good. And I think that actually that's what's really broken. I think that our elected representatives are not pressurable in this sense. So we have to figure out how to build a movement that could topple and replace or do something like that. So I think that as long as the students continue to kind of ask the adults to do the right thing, they will fail. And that's the deeper issue than the specific demands being made. If
they're not pressurable, then how do you enact that change? Does it only come through the vote? And these are young people who will soon have the vote.
Right. I think that that's the fundamental problem that we're at right now, which is that we have these in America, at least, and in other countries, I believe, these people who are elected, but they're not representative of us, and they're not pressurable by us. So there has to be some sort of electoral strategy. At the same time, I mean, in order to give a nuanced answer, I do think there's a real danger that these student activists could be co-opted into the existing progressive campaign to try to elect another kind of Obama figure, when what's necessary is something much more deeper, something deeper about the engagement of how decisions are made in our country. So I think what would be amazing is for the students to say, look, adults have failed us across the board. We're going to build some sort of youth political power, political party and get ourselves elected into power and all. Then I would really start to get excited. I mean, at the same time, I'd be like a little skeptical, but I think it would be an exciting direction. So I think that once the students realize that the adults will not save them, maybe we will see something emerge that could be beautiful.
What's the alternative if they don't do that?
Well, if they don't do that, then they will, maybe some of them will end up on, glossy magazine covers with nice photo shoots. Maybe some of them will get, nice fellowships to college and all this kind of stuff, and the movement will disappear. So I think that, we have seen since Occupy Wall Street the continued spontaneous creation and then dissolution of social movements. We had Black Lives Matter, I Don't Know More, Coney 2012, the Women's March. Now we have, March for Our Lives. We had March for Science. There is a real danger that this moment will pass and that they will feel the extreme trauma of being part of a movement that disappears, that is defeated.
You mentioned the Women's March there, which was the last big protest movement. David Frum, who's a regular contributor on this show, wrote ahead of that march that, quote, left liberal demonstrations are engineered to fail. He says that's because, with the rarest of exceptions, their exercises in catharsis polarize opinion against them and empower the targets of their outrage. What's your take? Do you think this march will only result in, making the NRA stronger, or is there actually some ability to have a cultural impact in the same way that the civil rights era saw cultural impact?
I think that I tend to agree with David Frum on this particular point, because I think that there's a tendency on the left to kind of celebrate things like raising awareness and changing the discourse, which quite frankly does not result in concrete social change. It does not result in political change. If you want to end the school shootings, then you have to create a movement that is oriented really around concretely taking power. And so I think that is an obvious and clear direction that needs to go forward. But I think that the challenge becomes, well, how do you do that? Because I think there's also a danger to say, well, we need to go towards electoral politics, and then you just get co-opted right into the Democratic establishment. And that's also, I think, a kind of a kiss of death.
So what, they've got to go unilateral? They've got to be on their own?
I would say that what I would be doing if I was in their position, and I started as an activist when I was 13, so this is the advice that I wish I had received, is that I would be trying to build a global youth social movement that is not wedded to a particular leftist or rightist ideology, but is instead trying to get the youth around the world to rise up. That's what I would be trying to do with the real, I mean, one of them needs to get up and say, and I'm willing to run for office, and I'm willing to, this kind of thing. But I think until the social movement starts to actually say, no, we are going to be the ones in power, it's just not frightening. I think Donald Trump needs people to protest him because it validates him as president. It legitimizes him as president.
Micah White, interesting perspective. Thank you.
Thank you very much.